Well, I'm Dr. Mamta. I've been with Manipal Globalnxt University for over, I think, 12 years now. I'm delighted to say that we are going to start this business webinar series. We've had quite a few before, but this time the series would be on transformation, transforming business, considering, of course, what we're seeing happen around in the world. And I'm really happy that we have Andrew Considine with us today. Andrew graduated from our university with a master's in science IT management. And this was about 5 years back, Andrew?
Yep, I think so.
Yeah, 5 years back. So ever since, in fact, Andrew has always been in touch with us, one of those really good alumnus, I must say. He's always responded to our invitations for webinars. And here we are. We have Andrew addressing all of you on this topic. Now, we've shared a very detailed profile of Andrew with all of you. I hope you've taken a look at that. I don't want to take up too much time, and I'm going to hand over the session to Andrew. But first, again, thank you very much, Andrew, for doing this for us on a cold winter morning in Ireland. Over to you, and you could start off with a little bit of introduction for the audience if you wish to.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Mamata, and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction. It doesn't seem like that long ago that I was on the other end of one of the webinars, so it's a pleasure to be invited to spend some time with you all. And today I'm just going to take you through, I guess it's more my experience from a digital transformation perspective, and I'll try to link it back into kind of the normal workings of a business, what transformation means, and really some of the challenges that transformation presents, I think, to most companies. I don't think the company that I'm working for is unique, though obviously there's always different issues and different people in companies. But hopefully it'll be very interesting, and what we'll try and do is keep the presentation to 45 minutes to leave enough time for questions. So I've just got a bit of feedback on the speaker, if you wouldn't mind just pressing mute. That's better. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Just give me 1 second. Okay, just let me know if you can see that.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so let's get started. So I've called the webinar Learnings from a Digital Transformation, and what I thought I'd do is just take you through a quick introduction to myself and my experience, and then also an introduction to the company that I've been working with for the last 3 years and going through the journey of a digital transformation. And I'll take you back to 3 years ago when we started that transformation and some of the challenges that led to us getting off and embarking on the journey. And then some of the learnings around what works, what doesn't, some things to look out for. And you know, I understand that there's probably a mixture of students on the call from an undergraduate and also master's perspective. What I would say is that regardless of that, you know, I think COVID has really started to make most companies, especially most traditional companies, sit up and take notice and start really moving on digital transformation. They've realized that digital is here. And so I suspect that anybody working in technology today, for any company of a kind of certain size or above, will have an element of digital transformation either happening or soon to happen post-COVID. So what I would do though at the moment is preface this by saying it's just my experience, you know, and as I said before, every company is different, every transformation journey is different, every requirements are different, but hopefully there's some learnings in here that will be interesting and may help if you find yourself in a similar position. But so just by way of introduction, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of the Innovation Group. I find myself in a commercial role as I had done in various points of my career, but really my background and my experience is more around the product end of things. So I've held senior technology roles in different companies around the world, ranging from startups that I've started myself with other co-founders, all the way through to large companies making billions of dollars of revenue. So a fair bit of broad experience across different company types. and each have their own challenges, but there's also a lot of commonality among startups as well as big companies in the technology space. I've gone through 2 digital transformations, both thankfully successful, but never easy. And I'll take you through one of those today to show you where it's not easy, and some tips to help navigate through that journey. And I've been fortunate enough to work with some really great teams, and either leading teams or working as a part of a team to develop and launch products that are used by hundreds of millions of subscribers and customers around the world. And that's by nature of the fact that I've worked in tech areas like telco and fintech and most recently insurtech. So I'll just take you through a quick introduction to Innovation Group, where I'm CRO. So Innovation Group, very briefly, works in the insurance space, but we also work with the OEMs, so vehicle manufacturers, fleet companies, the leasing companies, but then predominantly in the insurance space, so working with some of the tier 1 insurers. And what we do as a business at a very high level is we provide claims capabilities. So we run the claims for insurance companies or other companies in the automotive or property space. We do that through a combination of services as well as technology. We have a technology platform that offers full automation and heads down processing for the companies and the clients that we work with, or driven by technology. But we also then blend services and a global network of suppliers and partners into the mix to try and automate, digitize, and streamline claims as much as possible for the clients that we work with. Relatively, I'd say kind of large-ish size company in this space, medium to large. We've got around 3,500 employees. We've got 1,200 clients around the world. We've been in business for 20 years. Across the world, we've got 10,000 network partners, and we process over 2 million claims annually for our clients. We work across multiple industries, but our locations include our head office in the UK, but then we also work across the US, mainland Europe, South Africa, and then Australia as well. So a relatively large company. And some of the clients that we work with include probably some brands and names that you've come across before. In the insurance space, working with big insurers like AXA, Aviva, Allstate in the US, and then some of the better known car manufacturers like Tesla, Jaguar Land Rover, Toyota, Nissan, and others. So we've got a fairly broad client base. And generally, we're known as providing kind of services and technology across the industry. Now, that all sounds great, and that's where we are today. But I'd like to wind back the clock 3 years to 2017. And I'll take you through some of, I guess, the landscape of where the company was from a technology perspective. And just as I joined the company, this is kind of the status of where we were. So from a technology perspective, I'll start off by saying it was a mess. And I'll also start off by saying it's probably not dissimilar to many legacy companies out in the world, especially services companies that may not have had technology at the forefront of what they were doing. But effectively, 20 years of acquisitions, mergers, organic growth, with very limited technology governance and leadership, had led to a situation where we had a mess on our hands. And you'll see there some of the headlines. These are just some of them. But everything from enormous licensing issues with Microsoft, which was a real risk to the business. 11 different finance platforms across the world, different operating systems, active mailboxes. You can see there with 3,000 employees, twice as many active mailboxes with no idea who was receiving those emails. Multiple voice solutions, and the big one in the middle there was really the critical one, because there was a lot of risk from an infrastructure and licensing perspective. But really, the key challenge was that we had 300 different applications running the business. And those applications were largely doing the same thing, and mostly because though we're a group, we were running as a regional business. So each independent region had their own development team, their own product team, their own management team, and there was no centralization of strategy or governance. So every region got to do whatever they wanted to do, and largely that was whatever the clients had asked for. So 20 years of building up applications on highly legacy technology, and mess is probably the politest word that I could use for it. From an organizational perspective, what that led to is that we just weren't delivering on any projects for any clients. There'd been no investment in the base code of any of the platforms for over 2 years. We had 500 people in technology, over 500 people across different regions and zones, but there was no management of those. There was no strategy. Each was kind of operating in their own silo and doing their own thing. And we're spending over £3 million a month on technology, and that's when you kind of get into the financial end of things of a company of this size, that was an unforgivable amount of spend, especially with no return on investment. And we've been known because of this for being a provider in the industry that provided good services, but with very poor technology. And not only that, because we had poor technology, we were just unable to scale, unable to grow, unable to meet client requirements, and the company was falling behind. And then from an application perspective, as if anybody's kind of looked at legacy or traditional companies' IT infrastructures and architectures, this is probably quite a familiar view. It's kind of known in the industry as a spaghetti junction. What I would say is, and just to make it clear where the challenge was, is that this is just one of the 300 applications sitting within the network in 2017. And each of the other 299 plus applications were of a similar mess. And largely because with a lot of traditional companies, no planning, no thought put into networks, technologies. And we had a lot of legacy technology running in the estate there. And this is fairly common in insurance still, but also a lot of other kind of traditional verticals, where we had everything from Lotus Notes to COBOL. I don't know if anybody remembers COBOL, but we had COBOL in the mainframe, green screen applications. And because, just a complete hodgepodge of legacy applications, just almost impossible to try and integrate or interconnect with not only external parties and third parties, but ourselves as well. So, basically technology islands running in different hosting centers on different operating systems and different technologies. So a massive challenge. And so in 2017, the company was acquired by the Carlyle Group, which is a big private equity company in the US. We were taken off the stock exchange, and as they did their due diligence, they came to the decision that we needed to transform. And that digital transformation strategy was borne out by the recruitment of myself and several other technology leaders that came into the company. That was as part of a restructure of the management team and technology, but we were effectively brought in to deliver a transformation across the entire technology landscape. So everything from infrastructure, cloud migration, shifting to a single finance platform, transforming our operations across the entire world, and then most importantly, shifting those 300 different applications and replacing them with a single strategic cloud-based platform. And that's what I was brought in for when I joined as global head of product 3 years ago. And the program itself was planned on a 3-year program basis. We were investing £30 million in the transformation, so a significant amount of money. It involved a top-down restructure of the organization, and it covered everything from all the bits you'd expect. So infrastructure, applications, telephony, the migration to the cloud of all the servers, or replacement and decommissioning of legacy servers, moving the finance platform. But then really leading on from that, a proper full organizational transformation, because it's not just enough to change the technology, we have to change the way that we worked. And really the idea and the whole concept was to become a technology-led company. And it's an important point because it points back to a lot of the challenges that we then faced as a technology team. But really moving and shifting from a services-led organization into a technology-led organization is a big change. It's just a few words, but actually it's an enormous shift in thinking and an enormous shift in the way companies operate and are organized. So that all sounds great. Great challenge ahead. I joined the company with colleagues that I'd worked with before. We managed digital transformation and the shift to the cloud, migration to the cloud in a previous organization. So a heavyweight technology team. But what we came into was a very, very traditional services organization. And nobody outside of the new technology team that came in had ever been involved in a transformation program. They'd never been involved in a change program. There was very little technology experience amongst any of the leadership across both our regions as well as group. And so, talking about change, digital transformation all sounded great from a buzzword perspective, but, there wasn't really a lot of understanding in terms of what that actually meant, and the changes that needed to happen. And change is hard. And one of the things I've learned over my career is that very few people like change. Some thrive on it. And as a product leader, I tend to look for people who thrive on change, because I think that creativity and ability to adapt is really critical. But when you're coming into an organization where you've had people that, may have been in roles for 20+ years, have come from a pre-digital age, working in, kind of before applications became the center of everything. People who've been doing the same thing for years on end. It's hard. Change as a concept is hard, and I think across the organization there was recognition that it was needed, because we weren't scaling. There was issues on growth, customer perception. So there was real recognition across the organization that it had to happen, but there was no real concept of how to make it happen and the changes that would be needed to really bring that change in. So resistance was everywhere. And change is often translated as I'm going to lose my job, or I'm afraid that I won't know what I'm doing. I'll be shown up. I'll be found out. And when you've got 3,000+ people, or close to 3,000+ people with that kind of feeling, it's a big job to shift that mindset. And from a people perspective, you don't know what you don't know. And again, the kind of people who like change will go out and find out what they don't know. But, sometimes people aren't always ready or willing to adapt. And it's incredible what the barriers that people will throw up to impede change. The line of, we've always done it this way, or, why do we need to change, or, the customer won't like it, or, any number of things that can be thrown up, and I've heard them all. It's amazing, even, from the top down in an organization, those barriers will come up. And it just may be the case that the capabilities and skills just don't exist in an organization. The skills around understanding how technology works, how to change organizational processes, how to affect change with the way we deal with clients, how we bill clients, how we invoice. It just may not exist in the company. And from a process perspective, when you've got a relatively large company that's dealing with clients and running services for them, there's always process. And those processes are often designed for a pre-digital age. They're designed around the applications that have been there in the company for 10, 15, 20 years, or perhaps those technology platforms were designed around the process, which would be even worse. But they were designed often years ago, and they may have fit the need previously, but they often don't now. And so it obviously needs to change. Legacy technology is often the impediment to that, but people can be as well. So it's just something to keep an eye out for, that we can't shift operational processes, or we can't migrate current operational processes in a digital transformation. And then finally, culture is a big thing, and for me, culture is key. I've worked in companies where everybody's aligned, continuously adapting, evolving. From a leadership team through to the graduates that are just joining the company, everybody's very clear on the direction that we're going in, and they're the companies that tend to succeed and fly. But when you go through a digital transformation, there's something that needs to change within the culture. It's just inherent in the project and the program. And to survive these days, I'd be happy to debate with anybody the fact that I believe that if you don't have a culture of change and evolution as part of the core tenets of the company, continuous improvement, continuous learnings, being honest with each other, and continually looking to change, look at what's happening with the market. If that's not there, it's almost impossible to succeed these days. So, I think certainly within Innovation Group, there was certainly a need to change the culture. And then also finally, from a cultural perspective, I've seen this quite a few times, and I'm sure people on the call on the webinar have as well, but there can be an us and them divide within an organization, and that us and them may be technology and the business team. It may even be within the technology team itself or within the business team itself. And when you have that us and them culture, there's a lot of blame being apportioned out. It's somebody else's fault. It's not our fault. They did this wrong. And if that's there, it's quite toxic. And I think it's one of the things that with the transformation, you need to get to the bottom of and make sure that it's not there. Because going back to my first comments around alignment, if there's an us and them culture, you will never get alignment across the company. So it's really key that that's looked at. So that's kind of setting the scene for where Innovation Group was 3 years ago. Lots of technology challenges. I've barely kind of scratched the surface of the challenges that were there. But largely from a technology perspective, solvable, with the right investment, the right team, the right approach and strategy, all completely solvable with a lot of hard work and a lot of dedication and effort. The more intangible areas like, people, culture, organizational processes, operating models, and all the rest, that's harder. And I think that was the hardest part that we had to change. And so to take you back through some of the learnings, kind of gone from setting the scene to some of the learnings that we had, having run through, started the transformation program and made mistakes along the way. We had some wins and successes. It wasn't easy, but I'll take you through some of the recommendations that I've got, having gone through this a few times, and certainly most recently with Innovation Group. So probably relevant to everybody on this call, but from a technology perspective, I think it's really important to always avoid the lift and shift. And there's always a bit of a tendency in the market to take the easy route and try and lift legacy applications and put them in the cloud. It doesn't work. And the whole idea these days is that with the cloud-based technologies that are there, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars every year in their technology. And my advice and recommendation would be to use it. Don't take that Lotus Notes application into the cloud. Don't take that platform that's using COBOL into the cloud. There lies madness. So the cloud technologies that are there, you've got to leverage them, and that's what we've done. So we've built out our strategic technology platform in partnership with Microsoft. We've invested in an architecture that leverages their microservices, all of their fast data applications, their security, their scalability. All of those are there within our architecture, and it's just given us the springboard to be able to develop an application that fits our business and fits the market. But whether it's Microsoft or Amazon or Google, it's all there, and I'd highly recommend partnering with one of those big players to leverage that technology that's there. And then the key thing is really to build for the future, so not business as usual. There's always a tendency within companies to take a new piece of technology and try and retrofit it into do what the previous platforms did, which kind of completely is against what a digital transformation is. There is no point just putting a prettier application or a better looking GUI on top of functionality that was built 15 years ago. So you've really got to build for the future, and there's certain ways to do this, because a lot of it won't come from the people within the company that are there today. But always build for the future, not business as usual. From an operational perspective, digitalization of non-digital processes doesn't work. As I mentioned before, a lot of traditional companies have operating processes and operating models that have been built over years, possibly around legacy technology, or just possibly because it fit the market and their clients or client base at that time. A lot of companies, again, when they go through digital transformation, try and lift that non-digital process and try and digitize it. It doesn't work. And there's many examples of companies, big companies out in the world, banks, insurance companies, telcos that have tried to do that and have failed miserably. So from an operational perspective, you've really got to think about the digital future and design a new target operating model and processes that come from that. And always start with the end in mind as well. So what is it you're trying to achieve from the digital transformation? So in our case, it was to remove all of the overhead that we had with our legacy IT estate and our legacy technology. But at the same time, we needed to shift the company forward in terms of growth, efficiency, and also simplicity in operations as well. And so to give you an idea, a lot of our operations involved manual rekeying across 3 different applications at one point in the process. Some processes involved something like 72 different steps on different applications. Huge amount of manual hand-holding through applications, huge amount of inefficiency. And because of that, that leads to a culture where you've got people in call centers or in back offices that are doing mindless, repetitive, boring tasks. And what that doesn't do is lead to good morale, good employee retention, or really good performance. So you've got to keep all of those things in mind when you go through digital transformation of where is it where we're trying to end up? What is it we want to achieve? Is it to be more efficient, more fast? Is it to grow the company by 2 times, 3 times? Is it just to engage better with our clients? Whatever that end goal is, that's what you start with, and everything is aimed towards getting to that point. And then finally on operations is to have a vision and stick to it. So the best statement that I've ever heard around this is to stop digitalizing or stop digitizing and just become digital. And if it's a really key point, it's a simple point, but if you have that vision of saying, this is the end goal we're looking to get to, along the way, and it could take 3 years, it could take 5 years, I've known companies to take 6, 7 years on this journey. But if you lose track of the end vision and the end goal, you can go off in all sorts of weird or wonderful directions. And what often happens is that you end up reverting back to the way it was done previously. So the main goal is you always stick to the vision. If it's not on track with the vision, then it gets ignored. You move on. And it's a hard thing to stick to. It requires a really strong team with really strong stakeholders, but it's really critical to make it a success. And then from a people perspective, this is very much a learning of the current organisation, Innovation Group. But I suspect it's the same with a lot of companies as well. But it's really, really key that you evaluate the team from the very beginning. And one of the things that I did, just by way of an example, when I first came into the organisation, there were around 50 plus people in product, all doing their different things, different head of products across different product lines, different experiences, different years of experience. We had everything from business analysts through to project managers, through to product managers, designers. But again, it was a bit of a hodgepodge of different experiences. And from a product perspective, one of the things that I did early on was that I interviewed everybody in the team, and spent the first few months really evaluating everybody's capabilities, and then I hand selected a team that I believed could be the change makers, and they were the ones that were forward thinking, creative, thinking like a product person, not like a technology person, building a waterfall 3-year kind of platform from 15 years ago. So that was it from a product perspective, but then also from a wider organizational perspective, it's the same. I think it's really key to evaluate everybody in the team, work out who the change makers are, work out those who can adapt quickly, who can learn from the mistakes, move on, and people who are really hungry for change, and those kind of people also have to be able to work with the wider organization. But if you're going to identify those people early, you'll work out whether they're in the company, and then where the gaps are, recruit that experience early. There are lots of people with experience of digital transformation, change management across the industry, and they're the ones to recruit early into the company, because they will become your change makers when you've got those dissenting voices of, but we've always done it this way. The client won't like that. We can't do that. Why can't we do that? Well, we just can't. That kind of feedback that often happens when you're going through this kind of experience. Those change makers in the company will help guide those people through that change. So recruit early. Across the team, going back to that big picture and the vision, make sure that everybody's aligned on that big picture and the vision from the very beginning, and just keep going back to it. every time there's a change, somebody might come out of left field, client X has asked for this, something's happening in the market, COVID has suddenly hit us. It's really, really critical to always keep going back to that big picture. What is it we're trying to achieve? Is what we're talking about right now going to help us achieve that vision and that big picture? And if it's not, let's stop talking about it. The best person that I've seen explain this from a really impressive point of view is Elon Musk. And if you've ever seen any of his interviews, which I'm sure everybody has, he always talks about that big picture at the end, and nothing's going to stop him getting to that point. It doesn't always. I'm sure if you're an employee of Elon's, it doesn't always end happily. But he's a driven person. But all of his companies are based on getting to that vision at the end, and aligning everybody on that as well. So I think that's really key for success. And again, just embedding change in your culture. And everybody needs to talk about change. It's not change for change's sake, but we can't sit still. And the biggest companies in the world and the most successful companies in the world are constantly evolving. They're not sitting still, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google, Tesla, all of the big name brands in the world today. They are continuously changing, whether it's their technology stack, whether it's their ways of working, whether it's a new agile methodology that they're adopting, whether it's their go-to-market. It's continuous change. And I think that is a guideline for all companies, is to have that ability to be able to adapt and change and get ahead of the market, get ahead of the competition. But it does need to be cultural, because if that culture remains in the company of, well, we've always done it this way, it's worked for us for the last 20 years, why change? Then unfortunately, in this day and age, that company is going to get left behind. There's no doubt about it. So that kind of brings us to the end of the learnings, and I think I like this slide because it's kind of moving from a don't to just a do it. And it's change is hard. It's often met with the resistance, depending on the company. But I think if you're able to achieve change within the organization, you'll shift the change in thinking. And whether you're an undergraduate or a master's student who's already working in the industry, I think having that mindset going into any role or in an existing role is really key. And you'll always stand out, because the right leaders and the right managers and companies will always recognize that kind of mindset and thinking. So now, in terms of has it worked? So to take you through the kind of the hard program that we went through for 3 years with all of the challenges from a technology perspective, from an organizational perspective, where we're coming into year 4 now, and largely it's been a successful transformation. There's still some way to go. So we've gone over the 3 years. So you could say we've probably met a lot of the goals in those 3 years, but it's never going to finish. So 3 years was probably an arbitrary kind of stake in the ground at the beginning of the program to put some budget and some timelines around it. But the reality is the transformation is never going to change in this company. It's going to keep going. But as we go into 2021, we've rolled our strategic platform out globally. We're in the process of replacing the 300 applications, of which 200 are already decommissioned. We've taken around 2,500 servers out of our network. We've closed, I think, 7 hosting centers. There we go. So the on-prem servers are gone. We've rolled out an entirely new telephony platform, which is quite a challenge in a big call center-based company, replacing multiple legacy telephony platforms with a new digital cloud-based telephony platform. And we've taken our new operational models live as well. So we were fortunate enough to have enough capability within the company on the business side of things to run alongside the technology transformation. So we have moved from having thousands of different operating models across the world to single operating models in common parts of our business. So, for example, our motor claims process and operational model in Germany is exactly the same as it is in Australia, and it's exactly the same as it is in the US. And that definitely was not the case 3 years ago. And so what that means is that we've now got the ability to be able to cookie cutter that operational approach into new regions as we grow. It also means that we can have common training. We've got a single platform that's running all of those operating models. So it just means we've got a lot more simplicity within our business. We're 30% more efficient. I actually think this is a conservative estimate, but I'll explain that a little bit further. So one of the goals that we set out in our transformation milestones and metrics to success were to become more efficient as an organization. Now, what that didn't mean was just cutting headcount. What it meant is that we wanted to grow the business with the same headcount, but having the resources within our company doing more effective and performant tasks than some of the really manual, difficult, mundane, boring processes that people were operating in before. Things like before you had people that were picking up an invoice from one pile, typing the details from that invoice in and putting it in the next pile. Those same people are now analyzing statistics on finance to work out if there's any outliers or anomalies in our financial data, which then will trigger off a different process to go and search that out. So we've become more efficient about how we operate as a business. And what that's meant is that with the same resource, we've been able to grow the business. And we've been able to do that throughout COVID as well. I haven't mentioned much about COVID, and it's because, unlike a lot of companies, we started our transformation a long time before COVID came. But COVID obviously had an impact, but because we had implemented a lot of those changes in the 2.5 years leading up to COVID, we were able to shift our locations, our operations, our technology really quickly. I would say that if COVID had come back in 2017, it wouldn't have been as successful. I think the company actually would have been at risk of failing, simply because the technology wasn't good enough and our operating processes and models weren't good enough either. We've taken the entire company into the cloud. So moving everybody into Azure, everybody's on the same devices. The entire company is using Office 365, for example, and Teams like we're using today, integrated into Outlook, or the Microsoft 365 suite, which is also integrated with our operational platform. So we have a really seamless process now. So whether it's a call coming into our call center, whether it's data coming across a data feed, whether it's an employee communicating with a client or communicating with an end policyholder, a customer of one of our clients, it's all done on the same platforms, the same applications. It's consistent. And we have a complete consistency of data within the company as well, which is a really important point, because where you have disparate data systems, it's very hard to find out and see what's going on in a company. We now have a single data repository, which means that we can report better, we can forecast better, we can run analysis, we can use machine learning models across the business to help us do business better. Okay, and what it's led to is that going from a company that couldn't scale, was doing a really poor job for customers, was getting or had an exceptionally poor reputation in the industry that we worked in, and was on probably a steady route to decline and possibly being broken up and sold. It was a pretty dire situation. But where we are now is that by going through the transformation program, we are now out in the market where we provide platforms or an application, we provide services which are delivered in a hybrid way with full connectivity. We are kind of open API-based company where we're easy to integrate with. We're known for collaboration. And I think the first point is a really key one, in simplicity. And it's what people are looking for these days, whether it's everybody on this call as a consumer, whether it's the CIO of a big insurance company, whether it's the head of claims of AXA in Germany, for example. What they're looking for is simplicity. Nobody wants to have issues around not knowing where things ended up, things taking too long, mistakes made, whether it's a human error or a technology error. Simplicity is key. And I think the digital transformation that Innovation Group has been through has led us to that point where we're able to really talk about that simplicity. And just in summary, obviously there's quite a lot that we've gone through. And again, just talking from my experience, as opposed to, gospel for everybody, but But just in terms of wrapping up, I think from a past perspective, change is hard. But I think what this very high level look at a very complex journey that you've seen here, but you can also see that it's achievable. In order for it to be achievable, though, technology, people, operations, and culture all need to come together. They all contribute to that process to success. And technology and operational changes are really important. It's really critical to look at target operating models. It's really critical to look at how we're going to migrate away from that really bad legacy application to a new cloud-based digital platform. So that's all really, really important. But hopefully what's come through in this talk is that it's the people and culture that's really important. It's the people that within the company that are implementing that change. They're the ones that are going to have to live with that change. They're the ones that are going to have to explain it to their to your clients, to new employees, to their friends and family. So it's people that are really key. So as you look to the future, focusing on the people within the company, the culture, alignment, ways of working, change makers, all of that comes together, and it's really super critical for making a transformation program work. And I think, just finally, if you find yourself working for a company, now or in the future when you graduate, and you're in a company that embraces change, and you embrace that change as well. But, from a company culture perspective, continuous improvement, following the same kind of process that we do in technology, especially within the agile methodology, always changing, always look back. What did we achieve over the last 2 weeks? Were we successful? If we weren't, let's be honest, work out what we need to change, improve, move on. It's that kind of really quick, rapid, agile thinking that becomes key. And if you find yourself in a company like that, then you could be working for an Apple or a Facebook, Google or Microsoft, and or for a company that's going to be as successful in their own way and their own niche in the industry with their own size. And those companies that are getting this right, like the big brands that I've mentioned, I think they're doing okay. So I think it's a good model to follow. So that's kind of the summary. Hopefully that was somewhat interesting. It's always difficult, 3-year program. There's a lot that goes into it. So bringing that up to a level to explain in 45 minutes can be a challenge, but hopefully that was made some sense to some of you. So I'll finish off there and just open up the floor to any questions if there is any.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was fantastic. In fact, I liked how you took something so complex and made it appear so simple.
Yeah, I wish it was that simple in reality, but that was.
I do. Tell me about it. But I think for all the students here, please feel free. We have an industry expert who's been through digital transformation, so he'll be here to answer any of your questions. So I was also telling them on the chat that this is like an interesting case study for us. It can't get any better or any more real for all of you before you go out to the industry yourself. So feel free. Over to all of you for questions, please. You can type them in the chat, or you can click on the raise hand, or just unmute your mics. All right, we have some things in the chat. Let me just check.
Okay, it's a good question. So I was hoping you could give an example of how you've managed a difficult situation in terms of people changes. I'm going to assume that this is around restructuring and changing teams. And I would say that is always a difficult situation. And I think, yeah, that's on the right track there. It's always a difficult situation. It's never easy. But going back to one of the points that I made in the talk around making those changes early, it's not just critical to get it right from a people perspective, to get the right people in place, but also to make sure that the people that may be part of a restructure or maybe moved on to other areas, that they know early on. I think there's nothing worse than people being dragged along for a long period of time. It's unfair. So I always prefer, maybe it's part of being Australian, but I'm always very direct and upfront with people from the outset, and I always try to make sure that, you know, that if we are moving people on as part of a restructure, you know, it's done in fairness. Always try and find different roles. You know, there's always different parts of the company and different roles that people can move into. But you've got to be honest and upfront about it, and sometimes it's just about having that tough conversation, but doing it in a fair way. There's no easy answer for it, apart from just don't let it drag on, because there's nothing worse than being in a position where you know that, you know, maybe you know the boss doesn't want you there, or you're seen as not relevant to the group, and they're moving on without you. Okay, hopefully that answers the question. The next one was, what do you think were the reasons your company people resisted change? How can you ensure that all processes and decisions are transparent in the organisation? That's a great question. I think you know, the resistance to change was you know, multiple factors. If I look at Innovation Group, we had some people that have been in the business for over 20 years doing the same job, and it hadn't changed. You know, same technology platform, same process, and for me, I can't imagine working. I've never worked in a role where it hasn't been about change. But obviously, there's lots of people that are in those kind of roles, and I think change, you know, sometimes almost induces a fear factor amongst people, because change means, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to be found out? You know, maybe the world's moving on. I'm not tech savvy. What happens if they change this application and I can't use it? So I think there's a lot of fear factor involved. So then I also think it's key to recognize that and get people in on the journey early. You know, just show them the kind of, that going back to that vision of where you're trying to achieve and get to, and getting people to buy into it. And it's hard, you know, it doesn't always work. But I've also found that, you know, the kind of the staunchest opponents of transformation, when brought along on the journey and kind of being involved in it and contributing to it, often end up the biggest champions at the end. Because, you know, if you've had somebody that's been in the company for 20 plus years and loves what they're doing, then, you know, by nature, just because we're changing something, that doesn't need to change. So, and then the second part of the question was just all about processes and decisions that are transparent within the organisation. That's a really key point as well, because a lot of times decisions are made at a management level and it's not always filtered down into the organisation. And that's a mistake, especially because, you know, the people in management aren't the ones that are actually running those processes a lot of the time. So the way that we've got around that, or the way that we've kind of answered that, is again following the same approach and just taking that kind of product and development methodology from an agile perspective, where we have stand-ups and we have continuous meetings, we have continuous retro analysis, all the way through to our finance teams are now involved in daily stand-ups. So we managed to implement that real kind of technology mindset across the organization. And what that means is that changes in operating models, changes in processes are all filtering down through the company, and everybody has visibility. Not everybody agrees all the time. You can't get full agreement from everybody, but, you know, if you give everybody visibility on, this is what we're doing, these are the reasons why, these are the challenges, but these are the pros, these are the positives, and I think you can get through. Okay, these are good questions. Hopefully I won't mix one. So the next one I've got is, what skills would we require after we graduate? Ooh, that's always a tough one. You know, I think everything they're going to learn in the university is going to be really important for the job. But it will feel, when you start any new job, it'll feel like you're starting from scratch again. There's nothing that replaces on-the-job experience. And so what I would say is just always keep an open mind. You're not going to know everything on day one when you graduate, but keep an open mind, be willing to learn, work hard. And, you know, from a skills perspective, you know, again, it's a bit of an open question, but, you know, it depends which area you're going into. You know, if it's on the development side of things, I'd always say make sure you're up to speed with the latest and greatest programming languages, but also really look at the industry, because not all of those latest and greatest programming languages are in huge demand. You know, some of the programming languages that were around when I first graduated are still being used today. You know, C# and you know, PHP and Java, and so they're all still in demand. So just make sure that you've got the skills that are in demand in the industry. If it's going into more of an operational or change type role, you know, I think the skills are just to make sure that you're ready to learn when you graduate.
Andrew, sorry, I think you missed a question there from Rizal. There is a question from Rizal. How you manage your job function with 4.0 IR, Industrial Revolution?
Yeah, good question. And we're facing this to a degree. And our business stretches across not only technology and services, but we work with network providers, for example, who are in the manufacturing space, in the repair space. And you know, I think a lot of the roles are changing, but there's still space for everybody in there. But I think you know, as automation comes in, as intelligent robots come into things, you know, machine learning and AI, I think we've still got some way to go on that. You know, a lot of the competitors that we're up against are talking about you know, industrial revolution and AI, and you know, I think everybody's talking again. We're not there yet, but it's definitely happening. I think the main thing is just to make sure that you stay relevant as an organization, as well as your role within it as well. Okay, so, and then just next one was, in my experience, sometimes digital transformation can be masked as a workforce reduction exercise, which often, at some level, how do you manage people morale, especially in terms of job security? 100%. Many companies go down this track, and some succeed in it, but what's often left is really poor morale and a different culture. We took a different approach, and I think this can work for some companies, if not a lot of companies, where we didn't want to reduce the workforce. We had no intention of reducing the size. In fact, we were looking to grow the workforce. But going back to my point on making the workforce more efficient, more performant, and you know, bringing in skills to that organization beyond just manual processing and inefficient tasks, to upskilling our organization to be able to work with technology, to manage tasks by exception, to help customers through, to be there for the real performance and value-based role that wasn't there before. So that's the way we approached it, and it took a while. You know, not everybody believed that that's what we were doing, because everybody, when they hear transformation change, thinks, okay, well, that's my job gone. But that wasn't our intention. And so you know, just continuously communicating across the organization, this is what we're doing, this is why, retraining, reskilling, I think largely addressed a lot of the concerns that people had. But it definitely, when you start talking about change, you will absolutely see a hit in morale, especially, you know, kind of on the factory floor or in the call center, out in the field. So it's really important, as long as the company is not looking to just cut, because a lot of companies are, but we weren't. So that's how we managed it. Okay, really good question. Yeah,
I have a question, Dr. Mamta.
There's someone using the mic?
Yeah, can I go for a question? This is Asif.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, hi, Andrew. This is a question on this digital transformation journey. I think you have spoken very nicely about it. So I just want to know, what is the most critical aspect of this journey, whether it's a technology shift, bringing like artificial intelligence, a chatbot, etc., collaboration, or it's a human mindset shift?
I think they're both important, but it's the latter that's the most important. That people, mindset, culture, those shifts are the most important thing. And often there's a term that's bandied around in a lot of technology today, which you've probably come across, which is shift left. And that shift left to your customer is absolutely key and critical. But in order to do that, you know, you need all of those areas to succeed. You need better technology. You need that people change. You need you know, their skill sets within the organization, and then you can achieve that shift left. I keep going back to Elon Musk because he's quite impressive. But anyway, it's only because he's top of mind at the moment. But he had an interview with the Wall Street Journal earlier this week that you may have seen, and he talked about the organizations that are working in the US and where he sees some of the challenges in the US from a corporate perspective. And his view was that a lot of corporates are too focused on the boardroom, on financials, on numbers, cost cutting, stock market, whatever it is, but just very kind of boardroom focused. And what he said was, for a company to succeed, and I really believe in this, is that the whole company, from the management team through to kind of every single employee within the company, needs to be focused first and foremost on product. And that product isn't just a technology application. The product is the service that you're delivering for for your clients as well. And if you get that right, then that's where you succeed. And he set out the challenge saying, Mr. CEO, Mr. CFO, when was the last time you used your product? When was the last time you talked to your customer? When was the last time you got that feedback? And you'd be surprised, a company like ours and many other companies that I've worked for, how many people in the C-suite don't talk to customers regularly, don't understand the product that they've got, what's good about it, what's bad about it. But in order for that to succeed, going back to your question, it is combination, absolutely people, culture first, 100%. That is the most important thing. And then you get that right, the technology follows. And it goes back to what I was saying before, leveraging the likes of the Amazon and Microsoft, Google technologies, AI, chatbots, cognitive services, data processing, all of that's there. 20 years ago when I first started building platforms, none of that existed. It just wasn't there. So we had to build a lot of that from scratch. And we kind of set the scene. But these days, you've got to leverage the fact that these massive companies are investing so much. But having the culture and the people around it is key. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Excellent questions.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I had a few while we wait for the others.
Sure.
I in fact wanted to ask about COVID and what impact did you really see? I know your transformation was already underway, but did that in any way kind of nudge people to adopt?
Yep.
A digital transformation?
Yeah, well, 100%. I think largely we were on our way, and going back to what I said before, I think if we hadn't have gone on that journey, we would have failed during COVID. What's been interesting though is that we're working with a lot of clients, especially in the insurance space and automotive space, that hadn't begun that journey. And I think what we're seeing is that COVID has really, really triggered them all off to go, we need to change. And because they've had enormous challenges throughout this process. And to give you a concrete example, we're working with insurers who have call centers in the Philippines, India, Sri Lanka. And all of a sudden, those insurers had to take people working from home. They were working on legacy applications, architectures. There was no infrastructure, no connectivity, and their call centers went dark almost overnight. And when you're talking about a big insurer that employs tens of thousands of people around the world, that's an enormous impact. And so what we're seeing, and I think that's quite fortunate that we are seeing this, is that insurance, unlike, let's say, fintech or the telco industry, has probably been lagging behind the other verticals, probably at least 10 years from a technology perspective. And what we've seen over the last 9 months is all of a sudden that started accelerating. So every single client that we're talking to now is about to embark on a digital transformation. So if anybody's interested in getting a role in digital transformation, I would be looking at the insurance space right now.
That's cue for all those who are graduating soon and looking out for jobs. But thank you, Andrew. I think we are just on dot. We maintain the 60 minutes time. Okay, that's Sailen. So Sailen is our current Masters in IT Management student, one of the students. So,
okay.
Yeah.
We'll probably manage internal changes better, but I have a problem deploying changes to external entities like business partners. What would you do to manage that? Yeah, very quickly. That's a really good point, and it goes back to what I was saying around our insurers that hadn't transformed, and we have to integrate with them. We have to deal with them as business partners, and it can be hard. But I think the way to manage it is obviously you've got to fly in formation with their own program and what they're doing. That can be frustrating because perhaps it takes a year to integrate with their legacy platforms, or they just don't have the resource to manage that integration. But I do think the way to navigate around it is to take as much of that overhead away from them as you can. And that's what we've done. So rather than trying to rely on one of our insurers' IT departments to provide a certain functionality or integration, we've just said, you know what, we can do that within a month. We do it in a tenth of the time, we'll do it at a tenth of the cost, and we'll take that on. We'll take that work on for you. And a lot of companies, especially big ones, will buy into that. And the reason being is because their own internal IT companies or departments can be expensive, slow, cumbersome. And if you can take that headache away, then often you can make it work. But yeah, I mean, it's a case-by-case basis. It doesn't always go that way, but that's the way we try and approach it.
Great. Thank you. So, Ceylon, I hope your question was answered. So thanks, Andrew, once again. Wonderful webinar. And if there are any more questions, I'll probably compile them and forward it to you. So have a wonderful day ahead, and thanks to all the audience for joining us and for your questions as well.
Thank you all.
See you all.
Great.
Bye,
Andrew. Bye.
Thank you.